In the sterile corridors of Cambridge's most secretive research facility, where million-dollar equipment hums behind reinforced glass and the world's brightest minds work on solutions that could reshape humanity's future, an unexpected visitor was about to witness something that would challenge everything he thought he knew about science, leadership, and the delicate balance between tradition and progress. The security cameras captured it all, the moment when centuries of royal protocol met cutting-edge innovation, when a future king discovered that sometimes the most important conversations happen not in palaces or parliament, but in laboratories where hope takes the form of data points and breakthrough discoveries. The morning mist clung to the Cambridge campus like a protective veil as Prince William's convoy pulled through the gates of the Institute for Advanced Scientific Research. Dr. Sarah Chin adjusted her lab coat for the fifth time, her fingers trembling slightly as she watched the black vehicles navigate the narrow road leading to the main building. 23 years of groundbreaking research, countless late nights spent hunched over microscopes and data analysis, and now she was about to present her life's work to the future King of England. "He's just a person," she whispered to herself, though her racing pulse suggested otherwise. The irony wasn't lost on her that someone who had spent years studying human cellular behavior was struggling to manage her own physiological response to stress. Inside the lead vehicle, Prince William reviewed his briefing notes one final time. The Cambridge Institute had been conducting revolutionary research in regenerative medicine, climate adaptation technologies, and sustainable energy solutions. What had started as a routine royal visit to acknowledge scientific achievement had evolved into something more significant when early reports suggested the team had made breakthroughs that could impact millions of lives worldwide. The prince had always felt a deep connection to scientific innovation. Unlike the ceremonial ribbon-cutting exercises that filled much of his official schedule, these visits to research facilities energized him. Here, he wasn't just a royal figurehead nodding politely at presentations he couldn't fully grasp. Here, he could engage with brilliant minds working on problems that kept him awake at night: environmental degradation, medical challenges, social inequality. As the convoy came to a stop, William noticed something unusual. Instead of the typical formal reception line of administrators and dignitaries, a small group of researchers in lab coats stood near the entrance. Their posture was relaxed, almost casual, as if they were greeting a colleague rather than royalty. Dr. Marcus Webb, the Institute's director, had clearly made an unconventional choice about how to structure this visit. Dr. Webb approached the vehicle as William stepped out. A tall man with prematurely gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses that had seen better days, he possessed the kind of confident humility that came from decades of scientific inquiry. "Your Royal Highness," he said with a slight bow, "we're honored by your visit. I hope you're prepared for some rather exciting discoveries." William smiled, immediately appreciating Webb's direct approach. "Dr. Webb, I've been looking forward to this for weeks. The preliminary reports I've read suggest your team is working on something remarkable." The small group of researchers stepped forward, and William was struck by their diversity. Dr. Chen, originally from Singapore, had become one of the world's leading experts in cellular regeneration. Dr. Amara Okafor, a brilliant young Nigerian scientist, was pioneering new approaches to sustainable agriculture. Dr. James Morrison, a soft-spoken Scotsman, had developed innovative techniques for carbon capture that were being tested by environmental agencies across Europe. As they walked toward the entrance, Dr. Webb began explaining the philosophy that guided their work. "We believe that the most significant breakthroughs happen at the intersection of disciplines," he said, gesturing toward the modern building that seemed to blur the lines between laboratory and creative space. "Our teams don't work in isolation. A breakthrough in cellular biology might inform agricultural research, which could lead to new insights in environmental restoration." The entrance lobby defied William's expectations of what a research facility should look like. Instead of stark white walls and clinical fluorescent lighting, the space felt warm and inviting. Natural light streamed through large windows, illuminating comfortable seating areas where researchers could be seen engaged in animated discussions. Interactive displays showcased current projects, but in ways that made complex scientific concepts accessible to visitors without advanced degrees. "We wanted to create an environment that encourages collaboration and creative thinking," explained Dr. Chen as she noticed William's surprised expression. "Some of our best ideas have come from casual conversations in this lobby." Dr. Okafor joined the conversation, her enthusiasm evident in her animated gestures. Last month, a discussion about plant root systems led to a breakthrough in our carbon sequestration research. The connections aren't always obvious, but, when different minds come together, extraordinary things can happen, William finished, clearly intrigued by this collaborative approach. His own experience with charitable organizations had taught him the power of bringing diverse perspectives together to address complex challenges. As they moved deeper into the facility, the prince was struck by the absence of the rigid hierarchy he'd observed in other scientific institutions. Graduate students and senior researchers seemed to interact as equals, their conversations focused on ideas rather than titles or credentials. In one corner, a group was engaged in what appeared to be a friendly debate about experimental methodology, their voices rising and falling with the passion of people genuinely excited about their work. Dr. Morrison, who had been quietly observing William's reactions, stepped closer. "Your Royal Highness, what you're seeing here is intentional. We've found that breakthrough discoveries rarely come from traditional top-down research structures. Our best work happens when curiosity is allowed to flourish without artificial barriers." The first laboratory they entered focused on regenerative medicine, Dr. Chen's specialty. The space buzzed with quiet activity as researchers worked with sophisticated equipment that seemed more like art installations than scientific instruments. Microscopes with sleek designs sat alongside computers displaying three-dimensional models of cellular structures that rotated slowly, revealing intricate details that would have been invisible just decades earlier. "The work we're doing here could revolutionize how we approach degenerative diseases," Dr. Chen began, her initial nervousness giving way to professional confidence as she entered her element. "We've developed techniques that allow us to encourage the body's own repair mechanisms to function more effectively." William leaned closer to examine a display showing before and after images of tissue samples. The transformation was remarkable. Damaged cells had been restored to healthy function through techniques that seemed almost miraculous. "How does this differ from traditional treatments?" he asked, his question revealing a deeper understanding of medical science than many visitors possessed. Dr. Chen's eyes lit up at the prince's genuine interest. "Traditional approaches often focus on managing symptoms or replacing damaged tissue. Our research targets the underlying cellular mechanisms that control healing and regeneration. We're essentially teaching the body to heal itself more effectively." The implications were staggering. Conditions that had been considered permanent disabilities might become manageable challenges. Injuries that currently required extensive surgery and lengthy recovery periods could potentially heal with minimal intervention. The economic and social impact of such breakthroughs would extend far beyond the medical community. As they moved to the next section of the laboratory, Dr. Webb explained how this research connected to their other projects. "The techniques Dr. Chen has developed for cellular regeneration have applications in agricultural science as well. We're exploring how similar principles might help crops recover from climate-related stress." This interdisciplinary approach fascinated William. His experience with environmental conservation had taught him that complex challenges rarely had simple, single-discipline solutions. Climate change, for example, required expertise in atmospheric science, economics, politics, sociology, and human psychology. The Institute's collaborative model seemed designed to tackle exactly these kinds of multifaceted problems. The agricultural research area showcased Dr. Okafor's work with climate-resistant crop varieties. Large growth chambers maintained different environmental conditions, allowing researchers to test how various plant species responded to temperature changes, altered precipitation patterns, and different atmospheric compositions. The controlled chaos of the space reflected the complexity of agricultural systems themselves, dozens of variables interacting in ways that required both sophisticated modeling and careful observation. "Food security is one of the greatest challenges our planet faces," Dr. Okafor explained as she guided William through the research area. "Traditional breeding techniques take decades to develop new crop varieties. Our approaches combine advanced genetics with deep understanding of plant physiology to accelerate that process dramatically." William paused at a display showing projected climate conditions for different regions of the world over the next 50 years. The data was sobering: temperature increases, shifting precipitation patterns, and more frequent extreme weather events would create challenges for agricultural systems worldwide. "How confident are you that these new approaches can keep pace with the rate of environmental change?" he asked. Dr. Okafor's response revealed both the promise and the challenges of their work. We're making remarkable progress, but it's a race against time. The techniques we're developing show great promise in laboratory settings. The next crucial step is scaling these solutions for real-world application. This transition from laboratory success to practical implementation represented one of the greatest challenges facing scientific research. William had seen similar patterns in his work with various charitable organizations. Innovative solutions that worked beautifully in controlled environments often faced unexpected obstacles when applied in complex real-world settings. The environmental research section occupied the largest area of the facility. Dr. Morrison's carbon capture work involved equipment that seemed to defy conventional expectations of scientific apparatus. Instead of the bulky, industrial-looking machines William had seen in other facilities, these systems were elegant and, surprisingly, compact. Their design suggested that effective environmental solutions didn't necessarily require massive infrastructure investments. The key insight, Dr. Morrison explained as he demonstrated one of the carbon capture systems, was recognizing that nature has already developed incredibly efficient carbon processing mechanisms. Rather than trying to engineer entirely new approaches, we studied how natural systems manage carbon and, then, develop technologies that enhance and accelerate those processes. The system they were observing processed ambient air, extracting carbon dioxide and converting it into useful materials. The process was silent and appeared almost effortless, but William understood that the simplicity of operation masked years of complex development work. The implications for addressing climate change were enormous as technology that could be deployed at scale without requiring massive infrastructure changes. As the morning progressed, William found himself increasingly impressed not just by the quality of the research, but by the researchers themselves. Their passion was infectious, their collaboration genuine, and their commitment to addressing real-world problems evident in every conversation. These weren't academic scientists working on abstract theoretical problems, they were innovators focused on creating solutions that could improve lives and protect the environment. The informal atmosphere had allowed for the kind of substantive discussions that rarely occurred during traditional royal visits. Instead of prepared presentations delivered to a passive audience, William had engaged in genuine scientific discourse. He asked challenging questions, offered insights from his own experience with environmental and social issues, and found his own thinking challenged by perspectives he hadn't considered. Dr. Webb, observing the prince's engagement, made a decision that would define the remainder of the visit. "Your Royal Highness," he said, "we have something else we'd like to share with you. It's not part of our standard tour, but, given your obvious interest in our work, I think you'd find it fascinating." William's curiosity was immediately piqued. Throughout his official duties, he had learned to recognize when someone was about to reveal something significant. The subtle change in Dr. Webb's tone, the way the other researchers suddenly became more attentive, the slight pause before the invitation, all suggested that the most important part of this visit was about to begin. The secure elevator descended further than William had expected, traveling to what was clearly a basement level not indicated on any of the building plans he'd reviewed. Dr. Webb's keycard access and biometric scan suggested this area required specialized clearance. The prince felt a familiar stirring of anticipation, the same feeling he'd experienced before significant military briefings or when approaching particularly sensitive charitable initiatives. "What we're about to show you," Dr. Webb said as the elevator came to a stop, "represents 18 months of intensive collaboration between our teams and several international research partners. We've been very careful about who we share this information with, but, given your commitment to environmental and medical causes, we felt you should be among the first to see these developments." The corridor they entered looked different from the upper floors. More serious, somehow. The lighting was more focused, the security more evident, and the sense of purpose more intense. They passed several laboratories with reinforced glass walls, each containing equipment that looked significantly more advanced than what William had seen earlier. Dr. Chen walked alongside him, her earlier nervousness replaced by barely contained excitement. "The breakthrough came when we realized that the cellular regeneration techniques I'd been developing could be applied to environmental restoration on a scale we'd never imagined possible." They stopped before a large window overlooking what appeared to be a massive greenhouse environment. But, as William looked more closely, he realized this wasn't traditional agricultural space. The plants growing in carefully controlled conditions represented species from around the world, some he recognized, many he didn't, and some that appeared to be hybrid varieties unlike anything he'd seen before. Dr. Okafor joined them at the observation window, her voice carrying the weight of scientific discovery mixed with genuine excitement. "We call this the Restoration Laboratory. What you're seeing is our attempt to develop biological solutions for environmental problems that have been considered irreversible." Inside the controlled environment, researchers move between different growing areas, monitoring conditions and collecting data. The scale was impressive, but what caught William's attention was the diversity of species and growing conditions being tested simultaneously. Some areas appeared to replicate Arctic conditions, others tropical rainforest environments, and still others seemed designed to simulate the harsh conditions found in damaged ecosystems. "The concept is elegantly simple," Dr. Morrison explained, "but the execution has required breakthroughs in multiple scientific disciplines. We're developing plant and microbial communities that can actively restore damaged soil, clean contaminated water, and even help reverse some effects of climate change." William studied the displays showing before and after images of test sites where these restoration techniques had been applied. The results were remarkable. Areas that had been completely barren, damaged by industrial activity, natural disasters, or climate change had been transformed into thriving ecosystems in timeframes measured in months rather than decades. "How does this work exactly?" William asked, his question revealing the kind of practical focus that came from years of dealing with real-world problem-solving. Dr. Chen moved to a detailed diagram showing the interaction between different components of their restoration system. "We've developed specialized plant varieties that form symbiotic relationships with engineered microbial communities. The plants provide structure and begin the process of soil stabilization, while the microbes handle the more complex work of neutralizing toxins, processing atmospheric carbon, and creating conditions that support the gradual return of native species." The implications were staggering. Environmental disasters that currently require decades or even centuries of natural recovery could potentially be addressed in timeframes that made meaningful human intervention possible. Climate change effects that had been considered permanent might become manageable challenges with active solutions. The key insight, Dr. Morrison added, came from studying how natural ecosystems recover from catastrophic damage. Nature has incredibly sophisticated repair mechanisms, but they operate on geological timescales. Our approach essentially accelerates these natural processes without disrupting their fundamental effectiveness. They entered the growing environment, and William was immediately struck by the complexity of what was being tested. This wasn't simply about growing plants under controlled conditions, it was about understanding and recreating entire ecological relationships in ways that could be applied to damaged environments around the world. In one section, researchers were testing restoration techniques designed for areas affected by oil spills. The plants growing there didn't just tolerate contaminated conditions, they actively processed the pollutants, breaking them down into harmless components while establishing root systems that prevented further soil erosion. Another area focused on desert reclamation, where specially adapted plant communities were being developed to establish sustainable water cycles in extremely arid conditions. The technique showed promise for addressing desertification, which affected millions of people worldwide and contributed significantly to climate refugee problems. "The most exciting development," Dr. Okafor said as she guided William through the testing areas, "is that these restoration systems become self-sustaining relatively quickly. After the initial intervention, they continue improving environmental conditions without requiring ongoing human management." William paused at a display showing projected applications of these technologies around the world. Areas affected by mining damage, industrial pollution, natural disasters, and climate change could potentially be restored to productive use in timeframes that made such interventions economically viable as well as environmentally beneficial. "What about scaling these approaches?" he asked, his question reflecting experience with the challenges of implementing innovative solutions on meaningful scales. "How do you move from laboratory success to real-world application across the diverse conditions you'd encounter globally?" Dr. Webb smiled at the question, clearly appreciating William's understanding of implementation challenges. "That's exactly what we're working on next. We've identified several pilot sites around the world where we can test these approaches under real-world conditions. The goal is to demonstrate effectiveness across different types of environmental damage and various climatic conditions. They moved to a conference area within the restoration laboratory where detailed maps showed proposed pilot locations. Sites in Australia affected by mining damage, areas in sub-Saharan Africa dealing with desertification, regions in Eastern Europe struggling with industrial pollution, and coastal areas in various countries dealing with sea level rise and saltwater intrusion. Each site presents unique challenges, Dr. Morrison explained, but that's exactly what we need to develop truly robust solutions. Laboratory conditions can only tell us so much. Real-world testing will reveal problems we haven't anticipated and opportunities we haven't considered. The conversation that followed revealed the scope of international collaboration required for such ambitious projects. Universities, governments, environmental organizations, and private sector partners would need to coordinate efforts across multiple countries and regulatory frameworks. The scientific challenges, while significant, seemed manageable compared to the logistical and political complexity of global implementation. William found himself thinking about his own role in environmental advocacy and the organizations he supported through his charitable work. The restoration technologies being developed here could transform the effectiveness of conservation efforts worldwide, but only if the barriers to implementation could be overcome. What kind of support would accelerate your timeline for these pilot projects? He asked, his question suggesting genuine interest in facilitating the transition from research to application. Dr. Chin responded immediately, her answer clearly reflecting extensive planning. Regulatory approval processes are our biggest challenge currently. The technologies we're developing don't fit neatly into existing approval frameworks because they represent entirely new approaches to environmental restoration. Traditional regulatory systems are designed for single-purpose interventions, not complex ecological solutions. This regulatory challenge resonated with William's experience across various sectors. Innovation often outpaced the institutional frameworks designed to evaluate and approve new approaches. Well-intentioned regulatory systems could inadvertently slow the deployment of solutions to urgent problems. The discussion revealed another interesting aspect of their work, the economic model for large-scale environmental restoration. Traditional approaches to environmental cleanup were expensive and often required ongoing maintenance indefinitely. The self-sustaining restoration systems being developed here could potentially pay for themselves through improved agricultural productivity, carbon credits, and reduced long-term environmental management costs. We're not just creating environmental solutions, Dr. Okafor explained. We're developing approaches that make environmental restoration economically attractive rather than just an ethical obligation. That changes the entire conversation about addressing climate change and environmental damage. As they continued through the restoration laboratory, William was shown detailed case studies of sites where early versions of these techniques had been tested. The results were compelling, but what impressed him most was the systematic approach the research team had taken to understanding both successes and failures. Scientific integrity requires honest assessment of limitations as well as celebrating successes, Dr. Webb said as he showed William data from a pilot project that hadn't achieved expected results. This site taught us important lessons about soil chemistry that improved our next generation of restoration techniques. The willingness to learn from failures and adapt approaches based on real-world feedback suggested a research program focused on practical solutions rather than academic achievement. William had seen too many innovative projects fail because researchers became attached to theoretical approaches that didn't translate effectively to complex real-world conditions. In the final section of the restoration laboratory, they encountered what Dr. Morrison described as their most ambitious project. A large-scale model ecosystem that replicated conditions found in areas affected by multiple environmental stressors simultaneously, the kind of complex, interconnected problems that characterized many of the world's most damaged environments. Real environmental damage rarely involves just one problem, Dr. Morrison explained as they observed the complex model system. Areas might be dealing with soil contamination, water pollution, climate change effects, and loss of biodiversity all at the same time. Our restoration approaches need to address these interconnected challenges simultaneously. The model ecosystem demonstrated restoration techniques working on multiple problems concurrently. Contaminated soil was being processed and restored while water quality improved and carbon sequestration increased. Native species were gradually being reintroduced as conditions improved, creating the foundation for self-sustaining ecological recovery. William spent several minutes studying the monitoring data that tracked the progression of restoration across multiple environmental indicators. The complexity of the data reflected the sophistication of both the restoration techniques and the methods being used to evaluate their effectiveness. The most encouraging aspect, Dr. Chen said as she joined William at the monitoring station, is that improvements in one area consistently support improvements in others. Environmental restoration isn't just about fixing individual problems, it's about recreating the conditions that allow natural systems to maintain themselves. As the demonstration in the restoration laboratory concluded, William realized that what he'd witnessed represented far more than innovative research. These technologies offered genuine hope for addressing environmental challenges that had seemed insurmountable just hours earlier. But, more than that, the collaborative approach and systematic methodology suggested these solutions could actually be implemented at the scale required to make meaningful global impact. The research team gathered around him as they prepared to return to the upper levels of the facility. Their faces reflected the satisfaction of people who had successfully communicated complex ideas to someone who understood their importance. But William sensed there was still more they wanted to share. "Your Royal Highness," Dr. Webb said as they waited for the elevator, "what we've shown you today represents our current capabilities. But we've been working on something else, a project that could integrate everything you've seen into a comprehensive approach to addressing climate change and environmental restoration simultaneously." The elevator doors opened, but, instead of ascending to the main floors, they traveled to a different basement level. William realized that his morning at the Institute was far from over, and that the most significant revelations were still ahead. The elevator descended to what William realized was the deepest level of the facility. The security measures here surpassed anything he'd encountered earlier: multiple biometric scanners, reinforced doors, and monitoring systems that suggested this area contained the Institute's most sensitive research. As they walked through the corridors, he noticed that the few people they encountered wore different identification badges and moved with the focused intensity of individuals working on projects of exceptional importance. "What we're about to share with you," Dr. Webb said, his voice carrying a gravity that hadn't been present during their earlier conversations, "is still in the early stages of development, but it has the potential to fundamentally change how we approach global climate challenges." They entered a vast chamber that defied William's expectations of what could exist beneath a university research building. The space was enormous, with a vaulted ceiling that disappeared into shadows above sophisticated lighting systems. The floor was divided into different zones, each containing equipment and experimental setups that looked more like engineering marvels than traditional scientific apparatus. In the center of the space stood what could only be described as a miniature Earth ecosystem. Enclosed within a transparent dome approximately 50 feet in diameter, this artificial world contained recognizable geographic features: mountains, valleys, rivers, forests, and even small weather systems complete with clouds and precipitation cycles. "We call this the Planetary Systems Laboratory," Dr. Chen explained as they approached the enclosed ecosystem. "It allows us to test integrated solutions at a scale that bridges the gap between laboratory research and real-world implementation." William walked slowly around the dome, studying the intricate detail of the artificial world contained within. The landscape looked remarkably realistic, but, as he observed more closely, he noticed subtle differences from natural environments. The vegetation appeared more diverse than would typically be found in a single ecosystem, the water systems seemed engineered for maximum efficiency, and the entire system had a sense of purposeful design that enhanced rather than replaced natural processes. "The breakthrough that made this possible," Dr. Okafor said, joining them at the observation area, "came when we realized that effective climate solutions require integration across multiple systems simultaneously. Atmospheric processing, soil restoration, water management, and biodiversity support all need to work together as components of a unified approach." Inside the dome, monitoring systems tracked hundreds of variables continuously. Atmospheric composition, temperature variations, precipitation patterns, soil chemistry, water quality, plant growth rates, and carbon processing efficiency were all measured and analyzed in real time. The data streams created a comprehensive picture of how integrated environmental solutions performed under controlled but realistic conditions. Dr. Morrison gestured toward displays showing data from the enclosed system. What you're seeing is our attempt to create a template for comprehensive environmental restoration that addresses climate change, ecological damage, and resource scarcity simultaneously. The implications were staggering. Instead of addressing environmental challenges one at a time, this approach offered the possibility of integrated solutions that could transform damaged areas into productive, sustainable ecosystems while actively contributing to global climate stabilization. How closely does this model represent real-world conditions? William asked, his question reflecting an understanding that laboratory success didn't guarantee practical applicability. Dr. Webb smiled at the question, clearly expecting this critical inquiry. That's exactly why we built this system. Traditional laboratory research, no matter how sophisticated, can only test individual components of complex environmental solutions. This facility allows us to evaluate how all the pieces work together under conditions that closely approximate real-world complexity. They moved to a control area where researchers were adjusting environmental parameters within the dome. William watched as they modified atmospheric conditions to simulate different climate scenarios, testing how the integrated restoration systems responded to various forms of environmental stress. We can simulate everything from gradual climate change to catastrophic environmental events, Dr. Chen explained as she demonstrated the control systems. The restoration technologies we've developed need to be robust enough to function effectively under a wide range of challenging conditions. The demonstration that followed was both impressive and sobering. As conditions within the dome were adjusted to simulate increasingly severe climate impacts, the integrated restoration systems adapted and continued functioning. Plant communities shifted their composition to optimize performance under changing conditions, water management systems adjusted flow patterns to maintain ecosystem balance, and carbon processing rates actually increased as atmospheric carbon concentrations rose. The most encouraging discovery, Dr. Morrison said as they observed the system's response to simulated environmental stress, is that integrated restoration approaches become more effective as conditions become more challenging. Traditional environmental solutions often fail under extreme stress, but these systems seem to thrive. William studied the monitoring data showing the dome ecosystem's performance under various simulated conditions. The results suggested that comprehensive environmental restoration could be both technically feasible and economically viable, even in areas severely damaged by industrial activity or climate change. What would it take to apply these approaches at scale, he asked, his question reflecting genuine interest in moving from demonstration to implementation. Dr. Okafor's response revealed both the promise and the challenges of transitioning from research to global application. The technical aspects are surprisingly manageable. The restoration systems we've developed can be adapted to different geographic and climatic conditions relatively easily. The bigger challenges involve international coordination, regulatory approval, and financing mechanisms for large-scale environmental restoration projects. The conversation that followed explored the complex intersection of science, politics, and economics that would determine whether innovative environmental solutions could be implemented at the scale required to address global climate challenges. William's experience with international charitable work had taught him that technical feasibility was often the least significant barrier to implementing solutions for global problems. We've been working with policy analysts and economists to develop implementation frameworks, Dr. Webb said as he showed William detailed projections of costs, timelines, and expected outcomes for large-scale restoration projects. The economic case for comprehensive environmental restoration is actually quite strong when you account for avoided costs of climate damage and the productive value of restored ecosystems. The economic analysis revealed something William found particularly compelling: environmental restoration using these integrated approaches could generate positive economic returns within relatively short timeframes. Instead of being an expensive obligation, comprehensive environmental restoration could become an attractive investment opportunity. They moved to another section of the laboratory where a different type of demonstration was taking place. This area focused on urban applications of integrated environmental restoration, techniques designed to address environmental challenges in densely populated areas where traditional restoration approaches weren't practical. Urban environments present unique challenges and opportunities, Dr. Chen explained as they observed experimental systems designed for integration into city infrastructure. Population density means environmental problems are concentrated, but it also means solutions can have immediate impact on large numbers of people. The urban restoration systems were elegant in their design and impressive in their functionality. Green infrastructure that processed air pollution while providing food production, water management systems that cleaned urban runoff while creating recreational spaces, and building integrated systems that generated energy while sequestering carbon. William was particularly intrigued by demonstrations of restoration technologies that could be retrofitted into existing urban infrastructure without requiring massive construction projects. These approaches offered the possibility of transforming cities gradually, making environmental restoration economically and logistically feasible for urban areas worldwide. The key insight, Dr. Morrison said as he demonstrated an urban air processing system, was recognizing that cities already have extensive infrastructure systems. Rather than replacing these systems, our approaches enhance their functionality while adding environmental restoration capabilities. The urban applications demonstrated throughout this section of the laboratory suggested that comprehensive environmental restoration wasn't limited to rural or undeveloped areas. Cities, which were responsible for the majority of global carbon emissions and environmental damage, could potentially become centers of environmental restoration and climate solution implementation. As their tour of the Planetary Systems Laboratory continued, William found himself thinking about the implications of what he was witnessing for his own role in environmental advocacy. The restoration technologies being developed here could transform the effectiveness of conservation organizations worldwide, but they also required new approaches to international cooperation and policy development. What kind of timeline are you looking at for moving from demonstration to real-world implementation? He asked, his question reflecting experience with the extended development cycles typical of ambitious projects. Dr. Webb's response was both encouraging and realistic. We're planning to begin pilot projects at selected sites within the next 18 months. These will be relatively small-scale implementations designed to test our approaches under real-world conditions and refine techniques based on practical experience. The pilot project sites had been carefully selected to represent different types of environmental challenges and geographic conditions. Areas in Australia affected by mining damage would test restoration approaches for industrial pollution. Sites in sub-Saharan Africa would evaluate techniques for addressing desertification and water scarcity. Coastal areas in Southeast Asia would provide opportunities to test solutions for sea level rise and saltwater intrusion. Each pilot project is designed to demonstrate not just technical effectiveness, but economic viability and social acceptance as well, Dr. Okafor explained as she showed William detailed plans for community engagement and economic impact assessment. The systematic approach to pilot project development revealed a research program focused on practical implementation rather than academic achievement. Every aspect of the restoration technologies was being evaluated from multiple perspectives: technical performance, economic impact, social acceptance, and scalability potential. As they concluded their tour of the Planetary Systems Laboratory, the research team gathered around William for what had evolved into a substantive discussion about the challenges and opportunities of implementing comprehensive environmental restoration at global scale. What we shared with you today, Dr. Webb said, represents our best understanding of what's possible with current technology and scientific knowledge. But the transition from possibility to reality requires support from institutions and individuals who understand both the urgency of environmental challenges and the potential of integrated solutions. William's response reflected both his genuine enthusiasm for what he'd witnessed and his understanding of the complex challenges that lay ahead. What I've seen here today gives me more hope for addressing climate change than anything I've encountered in years of environmental advocacy. The question now is how to accelerate the transition from research to implementation. The conversation that followed explored potential roles for various institutions and individuals in supporting the development and deployment of comprehensive environmental restoration technologies. Universities, governments, environmental organizations, private sector partners, and public figures could all contribute to different aspects of the implementation process. Dr. Chen raised an important point about public understanding and support for innovative environmental solutions. One of our biggest challenges is communicating the potential of these approaches to people who may not have scientific backgrounds but whose support is essential for large-scale implementation. This communication challenge resonated with William's experience in public advocacy. Complex technical solutions, no matter how effective, remained academic exercises until they gained broader public understanding and support. His own role in environmental advocacy had taught him the importance of translating technical possibilities into narratives that motivated public engagement. As the formal tour concluded, William realized that his morning at the Institute had fundamentally changed his understanding of what was possible in addressing environmental challenges. The restoration technologies he'd witnessed offered genuine hope for reversing environmental damage and addressing climate change at the scale and speed required to make meaningful global impact. But, more than that, the collaborative approach and systematic methodology demonstrated by the research team suggested these solutions could actually be implemented successfully. The combination of technical innovation, practical focus, and commitment to real-world application offered a model for how scientific research could address humanity's most pressing challenges. Dr. Webb made one final observation as they prepared to return to the main level of the facility. Your Royal Highness, what we've shared with you today represents thousands of hours of research and development by some of the world's most talented scientists. But, the most important work implementing these solutions at scale requires leadership and support from people who understand both the potential and the urgency. William's response reflected both his appreciation for what he'd witnessed and his commitment to supporting the transition from research to implementation. I can assure you that what I've learned today will inform my approach to environmental advocacy going forward. The work you're doing here offers genuine hope for future generations. As they emerged into the afternoon sunlight, William reflected on a morning that had exceeded his expectations in every respect. What had begun as a routine visit to acknowledge scientific achievement had evolved into an encounter with research that could reshape humanity's approach to environmental challenges. The passionate commitment of the researchers, the sophistication of their approaches, and the genuine potential for global impact had transformed his understanding of what was possible. The convoy that would take him to his next official engagement waited nearby, but William's thoughts remained focused on the extraordinary morning he'd spent with some of the world's most innovative environmental researchers. The restoration technologies he'd witnessed offered more than technical solutions to environmental problems, they offered hope that the challenges facing future generations might not be insurmountable after all.